Okay, hey YouTube. It is one day since my 3-month surgery follow-up. It's actually about 13 days now, or 13 weeks since I had surgery. And things are going pretty well. So the title of this video is When My Post-Op Vagina Became a Vagina. So I was supposed to actually have my 3-month follow-up last week, but because of the snow, it got snowed out and postponed a week, which meant that instead of staying with friends in the Philadelphia area, Sunday night going into my appointment Monday and kind of everything working smoothly, I got the last flight into Philly this past Sunday, so I land at midnight. It takes me a while to get into my hotel. There are no rental cars the following morning, like, blah, like, like, just naturally this is how it's going to work out. So the only rental vehicle available is a 12-passenger van for $170 a day. Jump in that and drive up to my appointment because I figure, well, I've already taken the day off of work. I've spent the time to fly up here, like, the money associated with that. So, whatever. What's an extra $120 or whatever for a car rental? Anyway, so beside the point, like, this is all perspective because, like, I'm complaining about these little things being problems rather than the fact that my vagina hasn't stopped bleeding, or I don't have sensation down there, or I really don't like the aesthetic, because my one, kind of sort of concern is that, it's just, like, asymmetrical a little bit. And as somebody who can be, like, a little bit obsessive about details, like, that bothers me, just a little bit or whatever. And when you're sitting there dilating 3 to 5 times a day, with a light on it and a mirror or whatever, sometimes at the magnifying end of the mirror or whatever, like, you maybe pick at things and are more critical than you would be otherwise, because you're not going to spend 5 hours a day looking at your vagina, and nobody else is under normal circumstances. So perspective is important, and I think that's something that it took me kind of, like, sleeping on it or whatever, like, reflecting on it, to realize that, like, I kind of, like, went into my appointment, so that's probably where I should continue rather than, I'll just tell you what happened rather than how I feel. Anyway, so I drive up there in my 12-passenger van up to Dr. McKeon's office and see Heather first, her physician's assistant, who kind of asked me how things are going, because, like, I exchanged a lot of emails in the first few weeks post-op and was sort of freaking out, and I said, yeah, like, things are going well. Like, I mentioned that aesthetic concern. I knew I had some granulation tissue. I wasn't really concerned about that, though, because I knew they could treat that with a silver nitrate stick. And then kind of my last question was, well, is there a better way to get all of the lube out after dilation? Just like a practical logistics question. Because apparently people do things from jumping jacks and squats to taking a shower in some cases to try to get rid of it, and some of it just kind of stays there, which seems really gross, but eventually it'll come out. But that's why you have to wear pads and liners and things like that. So anyway, I digress. But, like, so that's my biggest concern, is that, like, one little thing, and apparently Dr. McKeon could fix it in her office, and I could go home that same day. So, I mean, that's how big of an issue it is, and, the actual complication of that might be, outweigh the benefit of the symmetry, where you could lose sensation, or, any other things could happen. So, something to consider. But Dr. McKeon's kind of response, I don't know, maybe, like, I just seemed kind of like a baby or whatever, was that, like, you went into this knowing that you weren't going to get, like, a pretty perfect vagina. And, you know, when you kind of contrast that with the fact that, you know, like, she always comes in and she's very proud about her work, you know, so maybe it means that, relatively speaking, I got great results, but I don't know what her other patients kind of typically look like. So maybe from her perspective, it's not that big of a deal. And, you know, like, if I'm sitting here and being honest, like, all the pros of my new vagina totally outweigh, that one aesthetic concern where I know I can't even look at it until 6 months from now, and, you know, like, 6 months from now, it may not even be that big of an issue. So, like, it's about that perspective and realizing that, like, you know, like, I just got basically free SRS, and this is my biggest problem here, because the silver nitrate stick actually treated that granulation tissue like I knew it would, but then what I didn't realize is kind of how much that granulation tissue was actually causing me discomfort and pain until it's, you know, been treated, and I'm like, oh, I can sit and move around a little bit better, and dilating doesn't hurt as much, which means that now I can actually focus on that a little bit more, because as much as I've been doing it, like, it can very quickly get into a sort of negative feedback cycle where it's painful because of the healing process and the scarring tissue and things like that. So you do it less often, or not as long each time you do it. And then it gets more difficult and whatever, and that's what causes you to lose depth. And so Dr. McKeon's like, look, you've lost almost half an inch of depth since surgery. Like, you need to get that back by pushing harder when you dilate. And this whole time I've been treating, you know, my vagina like this delicate post-op, like, you know, wounded, you know, baby bird that needs to be nursed back to health, when, like, she's sitting in there with her tools and moving around and touching things and doing stuff, and a lot more forcefully than I've ever been with it myself. And so I'm like, well, maybe I've just been, like, a little bit too much of a baby, or too conservative with, you know, wanting to optimize my recovery and things like that, because turns out that when I went home and followed her instructions, I was able to, you know, go deeper than I had for several of the last sessions, and I think the silver nitrate helped make that a little bit more pleasant as well. But then you start to realize that, wait, eventually this is just going to be a vagina rather than this thing you're trying to nurse back to health. And when you get to that point, then, like, everything feels great. And maybe it's also that it's daylight savings time and seasonal affective disorder, whatever. But I felt really awesome this morning going into work, about my results, about me, about my life, whatever, about work. Kind of like with my perspective back, the fact that, like, I have a awesome, like, wonderful, privileged life, that, these are the things that I complain about, are like, that one line is not quite as long as the other line, they're not symmetrical, that bugs me. So it's more like my need for closure, which I always know I've had kind of issues with anyway, which is why I can't let things die. But, you know, like, that's my biggest issue, is something that was already an issue before surgery. So I think that's a good thing, and I'm pretty good with where I am, and I'll see her again in 3 more months.